The Galactic fleet had been preparing for this day for years. The war had been brutal, and countless planets had fallen under their might. Entire civilizations were reduced to rubble as the fleet, led by Admiral Zithar, swept across the galaxy with ease. Their weapons were unmatched, their numbers overwhelming, and their goal was simple: conquer every world in their path. Earth, they believed, would be just another small, insignificant dot in the vastness of the universe, an easy target, ripe for destruction. As the fleet moved into position above Earth's orbit, Admiral Zithar stood at the bridge of his flagship, Oblivion's grasp. His alien eyes gleamed with cold certainty. He had seen worlds burn, watched civilizations crumble before his superior force, and this would be no different. His fingers hovered over the command console as he prepared to give the order to commence the final strike. "Prepare to fire," he said, his voice low but filled with an air of finality. "Let Earth see what happens when it stands against us." The fleet's warships lined up in perfect formation. They were massive, each one larger than Earth's largest cities. Thousands of alien soldiers, armed with advanced weaponry, stood ready for the invasion. They had no doubt that victory would come swiftly. The humans had fought bravely, but their resistance had faltered. The last of Earth's warships had been destroyed, their cities leveled, and their armies scattered. It was only a matter of time before the final blow would land. On Earth, there was no celebration of victory, only a grim acceptance of what was to come. The survivors, those who had not perished in the initial onslaught, gathered in what was left of the command centers. They were broken, exhausted, and filled with despair. The few remaining leaders of Earth met in hushed tones, discussing strategies that had become increasingly futile. Dr. Evelyn Carter, one of the last military commanders, sat in silence as the news of the impending destruction came through. She couldn't help but feel the weight of failure pressing down on her. Humanity was losing, and they had no backup, no secret weapon to stop the invaders. It felt as though this would be the end. The alien fleet was nearing Earth's atmosphere now. The countdown had begun, and every second that passed brought them closer to the inevitable. Dr. Carter's mind raced as she looked at the holographic display in front of her, showing the massive alien ships closing in. "This is it," she whispered to herself. "We've lost." She had no illusions left. The ships overhead were the size of small moons, bristling with energy weapons capable of wiping out entire continents with a single shot. Earth had no hope of standing against such overwhelming force. And then, just as the last of the Earth's defenses were about to be completely overwhelmed, something strange happened. A blip appeared on the radar. It was a small, unassuming dot at first, no bigger than a speck of dust on the screen. But then, as the blip grew larger, it became clear that this was no ordinary ship. Dr. Carter's heart skipped a beat. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. The technicians working around her quickly ran simulations, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. It couldn't be. There was no way humanity could have hidden something like this. The dot grew bigger still, and suddenly, the first of Earth's dreadnoughts emerged from the shadows, rising out of the atmosphere like a monster coming to life. It was enormous, larger than anything Earth had ever constructed. The hull was covered in layers of thick, impenetrable armor, and massive energy cannons lined its surface. The ship was a fortress, a behemoth that seemed to defy logic, and it wasn't alone. As the first dreadnought appeared, 2 more followed it, then 3 more, then 5. Each ship was more terrifying than the last. Earth had built these ships in secret, kept them hidden from the rest of the galaxy. They were the result of years of research and development, a last-ditch effort to protect humanity from the alien threat. And now, as the ships broke through the atmosphere, the entire command center was filled with a strange mix of disbelief and hope. Admiral Zithar, watching from his flagship, was stunned. "What are those?" he demanded, his voice shaking for the first time in years. His fleet had never encountered anything like this. These ships weren't supposed to exist. The humans were supposed to be weak, outmatched, incapable of defending themselves against the might of the Galactic fleet. And yet, here they were, Earth's Dreadnoughts, rising up from the ashes. The Dreadnoughts quickly formed up in a battle formation, their massive engines roaring as they moved into position. The fleets of the Galactic Empire seemed to freeze in place as they watched, stunned by the sheer size and power of the human ships. Zithar's eyes narrowed in confusion and growing fury. "Destroy them," he barked to his commanders. Now. But it was already too late. Earth's Dreadnoughts opened fire. The first energy blast struck an alien destroyer, sending it into an uncontrollable spin before it exploded in a fiery ball of light. The force of the blast sent shockwaves rippling through the nearby warships. The alien fleet was unprepared for this sudden onslaught. Their ships had never faced weapons like these. No amount of shields, no amount of firepower could stop the Dreadnoughts. The Galactic fleet, once so sure of their victory, was now in disarray. They had underestimated Earth. They had underestimated humanity. As the battle unfolded, Admiral Zithar stood frozen, watching in shock as his fleet began to break apart. The first signs of defeat were becoming visible. This isn't possible," he muttered, unable to comprehend what was happening. His once pristine fleet, filled with arrogance and pride, was now being torn apart by a force they never saw coming. On Earth, Dr. Carter's breath caught in her throat as she watched the Dreadnoughts engage the enemy. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, humanity had a chance after all. The sight of Earth's Dreadnoughts tearing through the Galactic fleet's formations was nothing short of breathtaking. The human ships were far from the sleek, elegant vessels typically seen in the galaxy. They were monstrous, ugly things, built for one purpose and one purpose alone: destruction. And they were doing their job better than anyone had ever anticipated. With every blast, the aliens' once proud ships were turned to molten fragments, the debris scattering into space like burning embers. Admiral Zithar's face had gone pale. His alien features, once full of confidence, now reflected confusion and disbelief. How had Earth managed to build such weapons? He had heard rumors, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer scale of what he was witnessing. His flagship Oblivion's grasp was being rocked by the shockwaves of the Dreadnought's firepower, sending officers tumbling across the bridge. Zithar gripped the command chair, his knuckles turning white, but it was too late. His fleet, once so dominant, was unraveling in real time. "Return fire," Zithar ordered, his voice now sharp, cutting through the chaos. But his commands were met with only frantic attempts to target the massive Dreadnoughts. The alien ships fired their weapons in a flurry, but the blasts ricocheted off the thick, reflective armor of the human ships, leaving them with little more than superficial damage. The first wave of attacks was ineffective. Earth's Dreadnoughts fired again, their weapons lighting up the dark void of space. A massive energy beam lashed out from one of the Dreadnoughts, striking the Caesarian battleship. The alien ship crumpled like paper under the blast. As it erupted into a fiery explosion, its remains scattered in all directions, and the shockwave from the impact sent ripples through the nearby fleet. Zithar's flagship shook again, as though struck by the force of the blast, and his eyes widened. It was clear this was no ordinary weapon. The humans had developed something far beyond what he had expected. "We can't hold them off, sir," one of the officers on his bridge shouted. "The fleet is falling apart." Zithar's jaw clenched. "Fall back," he growled, but even as he gave the order, his fleet was already beginning to retreat. Ships that had once been a symbol of power now scattered in every direction, desperate to escape the Dreadnought's relentless assault. Zithar's once immense fleet was crumbling, unable to keep up with the terrifying onslaught of humanity's surprise weapon. But Earth's fleet didn't let up. Dr. Evelyn Carter, now watching the unfolding battle from Earth Command, clenched her fists in a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was happening. They were actually winning. For the first time in months, She allowed herself to believe that Earth might make it through this. She had watched the destruction of cities, the loss of millions of lives. It had felt like they were on the brink of extinction, yet here they were, fighting back with a force the galaxy had never seen before. But even as Earth's dreadnoughts continued their merciless attack, something else was brewing within the galactic fleet. The Kiterans, a species known for their ruthlessness and advanced technology, had been observing the battle from the shadows. They had always believed themselves to be the true rulers of the galaxy, and Earth's sudden emergence as a force to be reckoned with was an affront to everything they stood for. The Kiterans were not part of Admiral Zithar's fleet. They were a separate power altogether, more ancient and powerful, and their patience had already run thin. Their ships, far beyond the technology of the galactic fleet, waited in the dark void of space, just outside the reach of Earth's sensors. The Kiterans had been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. They had seen the rise of Earth's dreadnoughts and knew that this was a turning point for the galaxy. "Zithar's fleet is failing," one of the Kiteran commanders said, his voice cold and calculating. "The humans are stronger than anticipated. It is time for us to intervene." The Kiterans knew how to deal with threats, and they had no intention of letting Earth rise any further. It didn't matter that Earth had developed such powerful ships. The Kiterans possessed weapons that could wipe entire planets off the map in an instant. They were prepared to do just that. While the dreadnoughts continued their assault, turning alien ships into debris, a shadow loomed over the battlefield. A colossal warship, more imposing than any ship Earth had, emerged from the darkness, its shape long, sleek, and terrifying. The Kiteran flagship, the Dread Sovereign, entered the fray. The Kiterans didn't waste time. Their weapons activated with a deadly hum as their flagship fired on the retreating galactic fleet. It wasn't a random attack. The Kiterans were sending a message. They had no interest in who had started this battle. Their only interest was in ensuring that Earth did not rise to become the new dominant power in the galaxy. Dr. Carter and the remaining leadership at Earth Command had no idea what was coming. The battle had taken a turn they didn't expect. The galactic fleet was in disarray, but now they had a new enemy, a far more dangerous one. On the bridge of the Oblivion's grass, Zithar realized that his retreat had been too little, too late. The Kiterans had taken control of the situation. A massive blast from their ship struck the Oblivion's grass, sending shockwaves across space. The flagship was ripped in half, the explosion sending debris scattering across the field. But Zithar didn't care anymore. His fleet was gone, and the Kiterans had arrived to finish what they started. As the Kiteran fleet advanced, Earth's dreadnoughts locked their weapons on the new threat, realizing that they were facing something they couldn't defeat alone. The battle for Earth's future had just become even more dangerous. Would humanity survive against the Kiterans' overwhelming might? Or would Earth's last hope be crushed before they could fully rise? The real fight for survival was about to begin. The arrival of the Kiteran fleet was like the shadow of death itself. Their ships were unlike anything the human dreadnoughts had faced. Sleek, nearly invisible to the human sensors, the Kiteran vessels were a perfect example of their species' terrifying mastery over technology. These were not ships built for endurance or brute force. Instead, they were designed to strike swiftly, silently, and with devastating power. The moment their flagship, Dread Sovereign, entered the fray, the battle had changed forever. Admiral Zithar, though badly wounded from the destruction of his flagship, was still alive. He watched in stunned silence as the Kiteran warships effortlessly tore through his fleet. His remaining ships scattered, trying to regroup, but it was already too late. The Kiteran weapons were unlike anything he had encountered. Their energy blasts didn't just disintegrate the hulls of his warships. They twisted space itself, bending light and matter in ways Zithar could hardly comprehend. Back on Earth, Dr. Evelyn Carter could only watch in horror. The victory she had felt moments ago was quickly slipping through her fingers. The dreadnoughts, despite their overwhelming firepower, were not enough to hold their own against the Kiteran fleet. With every pulse of the Kitaran weapons, another dreadnought fell. The ships that had once been humanity's last hope were now outmatched, outclassed, and struggling to stay afloat. As the battle raged on, Carter knew that Earth's survival was at risk once again. The Kitarans had come to wipe humanity from the galaxy, and their power was undeniable. But Carter refused to give up. She gathered the last remaining officers of the human fleet, their faces grim but resolute. "We can't back down now," she said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. "We have one chance left. We can't let these aliens crush us. We need to find a way to turn the tide." In the middle of the chaos, she was approached by Captain Eric Rhodes, one of the last survivors of the original Earth fleet. He was an older man, weathered by years of war, but his eyes still burned with a fiery determination. "What do we do now, Dr. Carter? The Kitarans are far more powerful than we expected. Our dreadnoughts are falling, and we can't hold them off much longer." Dr. Carter's mind raced, her thoughts darting in every direction. Earth had only one advantage now: the unknown technology hidden deep within their ships. The dreadnoughts had been humanity's secret weapon, designed in a time of desperation. But perhaps there was more to them than just sheer firepower. "We need to access the core systems of the dreadnoughts," she said, her voice quickening. "There's a failsafe, a hidden system that no one knows about, not even the Kitarans. If we can activate it, it might give us the edge we need to defeat them." Captain Rhodes looked at her, skepticism written all over his face. "A failsafe? What kind of failsafe?" Dr. Carter hesitated. "I don't know exactly, but it's designed to work as a last-ditch effort, a power source so strong it can incapacitate even the Kitarans. But it's never been tested in battle. If it works, it'll buy us time to regroup." Rhodes nodded, though doubt still lingered in his eyes. "If it works." "Exactly," Carter replied, her tone hardening. "We don't have time to question it. We need to act now." Across the battlefield, the dreadnought situation grew worse by the minute. The Kitaran ships had already decimated half of Earth's fleet, their weapons carving through the human vessels like a hot knife through butter. The remaining dreadnoughts fought valiantly, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. One by one, they fell, swallowed by the void of space, their destruction marking another step toward humanity's extinction. But Carter had no choice but to trust in her plan. She had to believe that the secret weapon hidden in the heart of the dreadnoughts would be their salvation. She transmitted a message to the last remaining ships: "Activate the core system. Now." The response came back from Captain Rhodes: "It's done. We're activating it." For a long moment, nothing happened. The Kitaran ships continued their relentless assault, tearing into the last remaining human defenses. It seemed as if the light of hope was fading. But then, without warning, the remaining dreadnoughts began to glow. At first, it was a subtle change, but it quickly intensified. The ship's energy shields flared to life with a blinding brilliance, and the power from their engines surged forward. The Kitaran ships, surprised by the sudden surge of energy, hesitated for a split second. That was all the time Earth needed. The dreadnoughts fired. This time, their weapons were unlike anything the Kitarans had seen before. The beams from the human ships were not just energy. They were raw, chaotic, destructive forces, ripping through space itself. The Kitaran ships, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves scrambling to avoid the new onslaught. But it was too late. The first Kitaran warship that was struck by a blast from the dreadnought's core was torn apart. Its shields couldn't hold, and the energy blasts sent the ship into a spiral, its hull breaking apart in a series of violent explosions. Admiral Zithar, still alive but barely able to process what was happening, watched in awe. The tables had turned once again, but not in the way he had imagined. His fleet, which had once been unstoppable, was now retreating in full force. Dr. Carter watched as the tide of battle shifted. Her heart raced as the dreadnoughts fired again, sending another Kitaran ship into oblivion. This wasn't just a victory. It was a statement. Humanity had refused to die. They had fought back against an enemy they had no business fighting, and they were winning. But Carter knew that this was only the beginning. The Karens would not give up easily. The true test of Earth's survival had just begun. Would the human fleet be enough to finish what had been started, or would the Karens launch their final retaliation? As the battle raged on, one thing was certain. Earth had just proven that it wasn't finished yet. The aftermath of Earth's unexpected victory over the Kitaran forces was a mix of disbelief and euphoria. The human fleet had survived the initial onslaught, and against all odds, they had turned the tide of battle. The Kitaran ships that had once seemed invincible now lay in pieces, their mighty warships scattered across the void, broken and burning. Admiral Zithar's fleet had retreated in disarray, leaving behind a war-torn battlefield that stretched across the dark expanse of space. Earth's dreadnoughts, now fully powered by the mysterious core system, stood tall as the symbols of humanity's defiance. But even in the wake of this stunning victory, Dr. Evelyn Carter couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The Kitaran fleet may have been crippled, but she knew better than to believe that they would simply accept defeat. The Kitarans were a ruthless species, and the pain of their losses would burn like a fire in their hearts. They would return, stronger and angrier than before. And when they did, Earth would need to be ready. Back at Earth Command, the leaders of the human resistance gathered. Dr. Carter, Captain Eric Rhodes, and the remaining officers who had survived the assault stood around a holographic map of the galaxy, looking at the scattered remains of the Kitaran fleet. Their faces were worn, their bodies battered, but their eyes held the fire of determination. The enemy had underestimated humanity, but that mistake was not one they would make again. "We can't relax yet," Dr. Carter said, breaking the silence. Her voice was firm, her mind already working on the next step. "The Kitarans will come back. They won't leave us alone after this. We have to prepare for their retaliation." "Agreed," Captain Rhodes replied, his face grim. "But how do we prepare? They've already thrown everything they have at us, and we still don't know the full extent of their power. We need to learn more about their technology," Dr. Carter continued. "That's our best chance. The Dreadnoughts have proven capable, but if we're going to survive, we need to understand the enemy we're facing. We need to reverse engineer some of their weapon systems. If we can adapt our technology to counter their strengths, we might stand a chance." The officers nodded in agreement, though there was still a palpable sense of uncertainty. How could humanity, so small and insignificant in the vastness of the galaxy, continue to fight against such an overwhelming foe? And yet, deep within their hearts, they knew that they had no choice. The fight for Earth's survival was far from over. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Kitaran High Command was in disarray. Admiral Zithar had barely escaped the destruction of his fleet, and he was not pleased. The humiliation of defeat at the hands of a species as primitive as humans had shaken his confidence to the core. In the dark chambers of the Kitaran War Council, he stood before his leaders, seething with anger. "They're not finished," Zithar growled, his voice cold and low. "The humans still have their dreadnoughts. We underestimated them, but we will not make that mistake again." One of the Kitaran commanders, a tall figure with sharp, angular features, stepped forward. "We have suffered great losses, Admiral, but we have the power to strike back. The humans are not prepared for what's coming. Our reinforcements are already on the way." Zithar's eyes flashed with a new resolve. "Good. Let them come. This time, we will crush them completely. The humans will never stand against us again." As the Kitaran fleet prepared to regroup, Earth's dreadnoughts continued to patrol their space, ready for whatever might come next. Dr. Carter and her team worked tirelessly, pushing the limits of their technology to develop new weapons and strategies. The human spirit, once on the brink of extinction, was now stronger than ever. But as the days passed, a growing sense of urgency began to settle over the command center. The Kitarans had not disappeared. They were gathering their forces, preparing for the final battle that would determine the fate of Earth. The enemy's reinforcements arrived sooner than expected. An enormous fleet, even larger than the first wave, now looming in the darkness of space. The Caterans had brought the full force of their military to bear, and it was clear that they intended to finish what they had started. Earth's dreadnoughts were ready, but so were the Caterans. The time for tactical retreats, for waiting, had passed. This would be the final confrontation. Dr. Carter stood in the command center, looking at the fleet's movements on the large holographic display. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. It was one thing to fight back against an invading fleet, but this was different. The Caterans weren't just an invading force anymore. They were an entire species bent on wiping humanity from existence. There would be no mercy, no surrender. "We've trained for this moment," Carter said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We've shown them what we're capable of. Now, we finish this." The officers around her nodded, their faces hard and resolute. The time for fear had passed. The time for victory had arrived. The dreadnoughts, powered by humanity's newfound strength and ingenuity, moved into formation. Earth's fleet, scared and battle-worn, was ready to face the Caterans head-on. But as the two fleets closed in, the silence of space was broken by the hum of engines and the sudden flash of weapons being powered up. This was it, the final battle for humanity's survival. The Caterans would not go down easily, and neither would Earth. In the vast emptiness of space, the last, brutal conflict of the war for Earth began. Humanity's dreadnoughts fired first, their energy weapons slicing through the darkness toward the Cateran ships. The Cateran fleet retaliated with their own brutal strength, launching salvo after salvo of energy blasts that rocked Earth's fleet to its core. The battle raged on, both sides giving everything they had, each determined that they would be the last standing. But no matter how many ships fell, no matter how much destruction they unleashed, one thing became clear: humanity would not go down without a fight. They had fought for their survival once before, and they would do it again. This time, they were not just defending their planet. They were defending their future, and they would fight to the very end. In the darkness of space, there was no turning back. The final battle for Earth's existence had begun. The battle had raged for hours, and the galaxy itself seemed to tremble beneath the furious clashes of Earth's dreadnoughts and the Cateran fleet. The stars in the distance, once calm and distant, were now streaked with the fiery explosions of warships caught in the crossfire. The vast emptiness of space had become a battlefield, a place where lives were being extinguished and hopes shattered with each passing moment. But for humanity, retreat was no longer an option. The fight for survival had evolved into a war for their very identity. On the bridge of the Titan's Wrath, Captain Eric Rhodes stood, sweat dripping down his face as he stared out at the chaos. His hands gripped the edge of the command console, his knuckles white from the strain. The ship's sensors blared warnings as more incoming fire from the Cateran fleet tore into their shields. It was a constant barrage. The dreadnoughts had fought with all the fire they could muster, but it was clear that Earth's forces were being pushed to the brink. "Shields down to 15%, Captain," one of the officers called out. "The Caterans are targeting our engines. We can't let them break through." Captain Rhodes muttered under his breath, his mind racing. His thoughts were filled with one central idea: Earth could not lose now. Not after all they had sacrificed. Not after all they had fought for. "Divert all power to the forward guns," Rhodes commanded, "and get us a clear shot at their flagship." His officers scrambled to follow the orders, and the Titan's Wrath lurched as the energy systems adjusted. Earth's dreadnoughts were stronger than anything humanity had ever built, but the Cateran weapons were pushing them to their limits. With every blast that struck their hulls, they felt the pressure building, not just from the enemy, but from the weight of everything at stake. Meanwhile, Dr. Evelyn Carter paced in the war room back on Earth. Her thoughts mirrored Rhodes's as she watched the battle unfold. She knew the Dreadnoughts' core system was a game-changer, but even with all their power, the Terrans were relentless. Their weaponry was unlike anything humanity had ever faced, and the Terrans' brutal tactics were designed to overwhelm and crush all resistance. "They have more ships than we thought," Dr. Carter muttered to herself. She had hoped that the first victory had been a decisive blow. But now it was clear. The Terrans had been holding back their true power. She looked at the holoscreen in front of her, which displayed the status of the remaining dreadnoughts. Several had already been destroyed, their shattered remains drifting in the vacuum of space, their crews lost. Only a few of the mighty ships were still operational, and those were slowly being pushed to the edge of their limits. The Terrans had proven that they would stop at nothing to wipe humanity out of existence. Their reinforcements had arrived in full force, and they were relentless. "We can't just hold them off," Dr. Carter said, her voice hardening. "We need a decisive strike, something to destroy their will to fight." But even as she said this, she knew there was no one move that could guarantee victory. It was now a battle of attrition, and Earth was at a severe disadvantage. The Terrans were better equipped and more numerous. The Dreadnoughts were starting to lose power as their resources began to run low, and humanity's fleet was weakening. But Dr. Carter had one final plan. It was a last-ditch effort, one that could either turn the tide of the war or seal humanity's doom. "Activate the core system on all remaining Dreadnoughts," Dr. Carter ordered, her voice firm and determined. "We've prepared for this. It's our last shot at winning." Captain Rhodes received the order on his comm system. He looked at the flickering holographic displays of the Titan's wrath as the core system powered up. It was a gamble, perhaps the greatest humanity had ever taken. The Dreadnought's core system was capable of immense destructive power, but there was a risk. If the core systems malfunctioned, they could take the entire fleet down with them. But if they worked, they might be the weapon humanity needed to finish the fight. "We're ready to fire," his weapons officer said, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "But the Terrans have concentrated their forces around their flagship. We'll need a clear shot." Captain Rhodes gritted his teeth. "We don't have time. Fire at will." The moment the order was given, the remaining Dreadnoughts unleashed everything they had. Beams of energy surged from the Dreadnoughts, crackling with destructive force. The Terran fleet, caught off guard, attempted to redirect their fire, but the sheer intensity of Earth's assault was overwhelming. The Terran ships began to break apart under the onslaught. One after another, the Terran vessels were torn apart by the raw power of the human Dreadnoughts. As Earth's fleet pressed forward, a massive energy surge built up within the core systems of the Dreadnoughts, feeding off the very fabric of space itself. The glow of the ship's weapons intensified, and then, with a burst of energy that could be felt even across the darkness of space, a wave of destruction surged forward. The Dread Sovereign, flagship of the Terran fleet, was hit first. Its shields buckled under the intensity of the blast, and then the ship itself crumpled like a paper cup, disintegrating into nothingness. The shockwaves of the explosion spread out in every direction, tearing through the remaining Terran ships. The surviving Terran vessels, already on the defensive, were caught in the blast radius and quickly succumbed to the destructive power of Earth's Dreadnoughts. The Terran fleet began to unravel, their once imposing war machines now reduced to rubble. But even as the Terran fleet disintegrated, a deep, unsettling silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining human ships were battered, their weapons almost exhausted. The final attack had drained the last reserves of their energy. For a moment, it seemed like Earth's victory had been snatched away. Then the comms crackled to life. "This is Admiral Zithar," came the broken voice of the Terran leader. "We have failed, but this is not the end. The Terran Empire will return, and next time, we will not be so merciful." Dr. Carter and Captain Rhodes exchanged grim looks. They had won, but the cost had been high, and Zithar's words rang in their ears. The Terrans would return. The war was far from over, But for now, humanity had won the battle. They had shown the galaxy that Earth would not fall easily, and that alone was a victory that would echo across the stars. The fight for humanity's survival had entered a new phase. But whatever came next, Earth had proven that they would never back down. They would fight to the very end. The moment the Kitaran flagship, Dread Sovereign, crumbled into a cloud of debris, there was a fleeting moment of relief among Earth's forces. The battlefield, once filled with the deafening roar of weapons and the flashing of energy beams, now stood quiet. Silence descended over the field of destruction, broken only by the remnants of dying warships floating in space. Earth's dreadnoughts, though battered and nearly out of ammunition, had done it. The Kitaran fleet, once so unstoppable, had been shattered, their supreme flagship reduced to nothing. But as the battle died down, Dr. Evelyn Carter, standing in the war room on Earth, could not bring herself to celebrate. Her heart raced, and her mind continued to churn through the possibilities. The Kitarans had taken losses, yes, but this wasn't a final victory. This was just one battle in a much larger war, a war that Earth was still struggling to survive. "We've done it," Captain Eric Rhodes said, his voice cracking through the comms, his weariness evident. "We've beaten them." But even as he said it, there was an unspoken understanding that their work was far from done. The Kitarans had retreated, but their defeat wasn't a surrender. It was simply a pause. The nature of the Kitaran Empire was clear, merciless, vengeful, and unrelenting. They would regroup, rebuild, and return. Earth's dreadnoughts had only bought them time, not peace. Back on Earth, Dr. Carter knew what was coming. She could already feel it in the air, the tension, the unshakable knowledge that victory was temporary. The Karens wouldn't let their humiliation go unpunished. As soon as they had the power to strike back, they would. And next time, they wouldn't underestimate humanity. Admiral Zithar's words, though broken and defiant over the comms, echoed in Carter's mind. The Kitaran Empire will return. She leaned over the holographic table, scanning the status of Earth's remaining fleet. Only a few dreadnoughts were left in working condition, and even those had sustained heavy damage. The dreadnought's core systems had powered up just in time to deliver the decisive blow, but it had taken everything. The human fleet had barely held on, and it was clear that they were no longer in the position of strength they had once been. "We need to prepare," Dr. Carter said, her voice low but firm. "The Kitarans will come back, and next time, they won't be caught off guard. We need to strengthen our fleet, improve our technology, and build new weapons." Captain Rhodes's voice came through, strained but resolute. "Dr. Carter, we've been working with everything we have. Our resources are stretched thin. We can't just keep throwing dreadnoughts at them." "We're not throwing them away, Captain," Carter replied. "But we need something more. The dreadnought's core system is our best weapon, but we need to find a way to make it sustainable. We need new strategies, new technology, and most importantly, new allies." She paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the stars outside the war room's windows. The Kitarans had forced humanity to the edge of extinction, but Earth had stood tall in the face of annihilation. She was determined to make sure they stayed that way. Humanity's strength wasn't just in their weapons, but in their ability to adapt, learn, and survive. She had seen it firsthand during the battle. The resilience, the willingness to fight when all seemed lost. Dr. Carter turned to Captain Rhodes's image, now projected in front of her. "We need to begin contacting other species. The Kitarans have attacked us, but they are not the only ones out there. We need allies in this fight. I'm certain there are other species who have suffered under the Kitaran Empire, and if we can unite, we stand a better chance of surviving the next wave. There may be others who've been oppressed," Rhodes said, "but convincing them to fight with us won't be easy. The Kitarans have crushed most of their resistance, and there's still the question of our own fleet. We're down to a handful of dreadnoughts, and I'm not sure how many of them are fully functional." "I know," Carter said, "but we can't stop now. We have to rebuild, refuel, and strengthen ourselves. The Kiterans might have retreated for now, but their time will come. And when they return, we have to be ready. Days turned into weeks, and Earth's leadership worked tirelessly to regroup and recover from the brutal fight. The surviving dreadnoughts were patched up, though they were far from being at full strength. Engineers worked around the clock, trying to rebuild and upgrade their ships with the remaining resources Earth had. But even as the humans scrambled to repair their fleet, Dr. Carter's eyes were focused outward. She sent out diplomatic communications to the farthest corners of the galaxy, hoping to establish contact with other alien species that might share humanity's desire for freedom. Many of them, she knew, were in hiding, crushed by the weight of the Kiteran Empire's power. But some would respond. Some would understand the necessity of this fight. The response came sooner than expected. Small, isolated factions, species that had long been under the boot of the Kiterans, reached out, offering aid. The first to respond were the Varnuk, a reptilian species who had once ruled their own star system before the Kiterans destroyed their empire. They offered intelligence on Kiteran weapons, technology, and weak points, information that could be vital for Earth's survival. Other species followed suit, sending supplies and pledging military aid. Carter knew this was just the beginning. The Kiterans had underestimated humanity once before, and they would do so again. But now, Earth had allies, intelligence, and time on their side. They were no longer alone. The war was far from over, but with each passing day, Earth grew stronger. The Kiteran fleet, though formidable, was not invincible. And as humanity continued to rebuild and rally other species to their cause, one thing became clear. The Kiterans had woken a sleeping giant. Earth was no longer just fighting for its survival. It was fighting for the galaxy. When the Kiterans returned, and they would find a different humanity waiting for them. A humanity that had learned to adapt, to fight, and to never give up. The next chapter of the war had begun.